you ever wondered what's behind the explosive anger of online mobs? You know, what we call cancel culture? Well, today, we're going to get right into it and break down the powerful, and let's be honest, often destructive urge that drives us to do this.
To really get to the bottom of this, we have to start with a kind of weird question. What could our ancient primate ancestors possibly have in common with a modern Twitter pile-on? As it turns out, the answer is pretty much everything.
I mean, we've all seen it happen, right? Somebody says the wrong thing online and bam, this massive, faceless digital mob just descends out of nowhere to attack them, to silence them. It's like a modern-day public shaming, a digital lynching, if you will. But here's the thing. While the technology feels brand new, the instinct driving this behavior isn't new at all. It's a deeply wired part of our social programming, an echo from a time long, long ago.
Okay, let's really get into this. To understand the digital mobs of today, we actually need to rewind the clock and take a look at our closest cousins in the animal kingdom. So, picture a troop of chimpanzees. Most of the time, they're eating fruit, but every now and then, they manage to hunt smaller animals. Now, this meat is incredibly rare and valuable, and there's a simple, unspoken rule. You catch it, you share it with the whole tribe. Everyone's survival kind of depends on it. And this isn't just about being nice, you know? It's what scientists call pro-social behavior. Basically, it's any action that reinforces cooperation and helps the entire group survive. So from an evolutionary standpoint, punishing selfish behavior isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature.
So what do you think happens when one chimp gets greedy, decides to keep that precious food all to himself, and breaks that fundamental social contract?
The group becomes one. The punishment is delivered by everyone all at once, and it is brutal. It's often final. And this isn't just chaos, it's a violent, powerful reminder of the code. The group always comes first. So how does this ancient, primal instinct translate to us humans? Well, it has everything to do with what happens to our own sense of self when we become just another face in a giant crowd. I mean, think about it for a second. A person who is totally reasonable and kind one-on-one can turn into a destructive hooligan in a stadium full of people. The moment we become part of a huge collective, our personal sense of responsibility just seems to evaporate. We get swept away.
And it turns out, there's actually a cognitive tipping point for this shift. That number is 150. It's famously known as Dunbar's number, and it represents the rough number of stable relationships our brains can handle at one time.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. It's like a switch flips in our brain. When we're in a group smaller than 150, we see individuals, real people with quirks and stories. But once the group gets bigger than that, like on the internet, our brain just can't keep up. So it takes a shortcut. It stops seeing people and starts seeing simplified cartoonish categories. Them, those people, that side. Individual humanity just gets completely erased.
And this brings us right back to today. Because our technology, especially the internet, is like pouring gasoline on this ancient fiery instinct for stereotyping and group punishment.
You see, the online world removes all the natural brakes we have on our behavior. Anonymity makes us feel bolder than we really are. The lack of any real, immediate consequences makes us reckless. And then there's a third, really fascinating factor that basically turns off our brain's internal alarm system. Get this, a study from 20 years ago showed that when we interact with people online, our amygdala, which is the part of our brain that handles social threats, stress, and caution, it barely even fires up. We lose that natural sense of restraint and empathy we have face-to-face. This amygdala-off communication makes conflict not just possible, it makes it almost inevitable. So this all leads to a massive question, doesn't it? Are these online mobs really just a spontaneous explosion of public anger? Or is there an invisible hand kind of guiding the whole thing? The thing is, the algorithms running our social media feeds are not neutral. They're built for one thing and one thing only: engagement. And you know what's super engaging? Conflict, a good fight. So they actively push the most divisive, the most outrageous content right to the top, creating these perfect little echo chambers where our worst instincts are constantly rewarded and amplified.
And that brings us to a pretty stark realization. The companies that control these algorithms aren't just shaping the conversation, they are shaping our reality. What we see, what we feel, what makes us angry, it's all being curated and managed.
So now that we understand the ancient instinct and the modern technology that supercharges it, what are we supposed to do? How do we even begin to reclaim our humanity from this outrage machine? Well, the very first step is to recognize the trap of what people call slacktivism. See, when we fire off an angry tweet or share some outrageous post, the primitive emotional part of our brain feels satisfied. It feels like we've done something. We get that little hit of dopamine that comes with taking action, but without ever actually having to do anything real. And you know who loves this cycle? The system itself. It creates a population of easily managed zombies who make a ton of noise and fight each other online, but are too drained to create any meaningful change in the real world. All our energy gets spent, and in the end, nothing really changes.
And that's the ultimate irony in all of this. Our most basic, fundamental human instincts, the desire for justice, for community, for belonging, are being hijacked by an algorithmic system that twists them into these pointless, divisive, and dehumanizing loops. The system is literally punishing us for the very things that make us human. So, we're left with a choice. It's an ancient choice, but it feels more modern and urgent than ever. The mob is always there, beckoning, just one click away, promising that sweet, satisfying rush of righteous anger. The alternative is to log off, turn to the actual person next to you, and choose a real connection over collective outrage.